Introductory lecture. We are in our first lecture today, in which we start, introducing children's literature in general, and having, a general idea about what children's literature is, and then learning, some historical background. Okay. But mainly the lecture today concentrates on the definition of children's literature and how it started, and some famous names, of people who defined children's literature, and the kinds of children's literature according to genre and according to age. So, as you see on page number 1 and slide number 1, you see children's literature is called, also juvenile literature. So, and that includes, children's literature or juvenile literature includes, stories, books, poems that are all enjoyed by children, read by children, and children, like to read. Modern children's literature is classified in two different ways, according to genre and according to the age. According to genre and age, this will be later on the next page, will be discussed in more details. So if we talk about the beginning of children's literature, so the beginning of children's literature go back goes back to stories and songs that were started first as a type of oral tradition, something that was just let's say told orally. Okay, as stories that were told orally, as an oral tradition, and that was first meant to be for adults, and then but still they were enjoyed by children, and children shared adults with these stories when they first existed and told. The development of early children's literature before printing was invented is difficult to trace. We can't really say when children's literature started actually. So that was before printing, but after printing was invented, so we can tell about the beginning of the first books, stories, or materials written for children. Even after printing became widespread, many classic children's tales were originally created for adults and later adapted for a younger audience. Okay, since this is important, you have to remember some important dates and names. Since the 1400s, a large quantity of literature, often with a moral or religious message, has been aimed specifically at children. The late 19th century, which is here again important, as a real change and important point in children's literature, the late 19th century and the early 20th centuries both became known as what? Golden Age of children's literature. Okay, the late 19th century and early 20th century. Okay, both were known or became to be known as a golden age of children's literature. At this period, why? Because this period included the publication of many books acknowledged today as classics. There is no single or widely used definition. Okay, again now, how to define children's literature and what does it mean? What is children's literature? There are many different, definitions for, children's of children's literature. It can be broadly defined as anything. This is it. Okay, first, one of the definitions. children's literature يعني generally speaking defined as anything that children read, or more specifically defined as fiction, non-fiction, poetry, drama intended for and used by children and young people. Here we have an important name that you need to remember, a figure who was, interested in children's literature, اللي هو Nancy Anderson of the College of Education, University of South Florida, defines children's literature as, according to Nancy Anderson, children's literature is what all books written for children, excluding, not including, okay, excluding what? Books such as comic books, joke books, cartoon books, and non-fiction books that are not intended to be read from front to back, like, such as what? Like dictionaries, encyclopedias, and other references or reference materials. Okay, this is the definition of children's literature according to Nancy Anderson. In the International Companion Encyclopedia of Children's Literature, okay, notes that the boundaries, of course, the boundaries between the limits of the lines between genre, okay, of children's literature are not fixed, not clear. They are a bit, not clear. They are blurred. Okay, sometimes no arrangement can be reached. Okay. Whether a given work is best categorized as literature for children, okay, or not. Despite the widespread association of children's literature with pictures books, spoken narratives existed before printing, and the root of many children's tales go back to ancient storyteller Seth Lerer. Okay, this is also important to remember. Okay, spoken narratives existed before printing. narrative, spoken narrative, existed before printing, and the root of many children's tales go back to the ancient storyteller. His name is what? Seth Lerer. In the opening of children's literature, a reader's history from Aesop to Harry Potter says this book. Okay. This book presents a history of what children have heard and read. Okay. Now back to classification of children's literature. Children's literature can be divided into a number of categories, but it's almost easily categorized according to two main categories, to genre and to the intended aimed year or age of the readers. Okay, when we talk about genre, by genre here, a literary genre is a category of literary composition. Okay, genres may be determined by technique, tone, content, or length. According to Nancy Anderson, there are 6 categories of children's literature. This is also important. According to Nancy Anderson, we have 6 categories of children's literature. They are here, you see, next page, okay, our next slide. These categories, we have pictures books, okay, traditional literature, fiction, non-fiction, biography and autobiography, and last, poetry and verse. Second category هو children's literature by age category. Okay, we have each genre and the intended age. Okay, these are just for you to know. The categories with an age range are listed here below. Picture books, from from early ages to 5 years old. Then early reader books, from 7 years old to 5 to 7 years old. Chapter book from 7 to 12, and etc. Then we come to an important point about, you know, children's books and children's literature, which is illustration. Okay, illustrations or pictures are very much common in children's books and children's stories. Usually, يعني almost always, you know, there, you know, books for children are accompanied, you know, with pictures. You know, this children's stories, they are always accompanied by pictures, and that is something, you know, started very early in history, and you know, it goes back to the Byzantine Egypt. You're using the papyrus, you know, the type of paper used, you know, to draw on. The papyrus from Byzantine Egypt shows illustrations accompanied by the story. This is an example of, you know, old story in Byzantine Egypt, اللي هو Hercules labors, showing labors of Hercules in illustrations. And modern children's books are illustrated in a way that is rarely seen in adult literature, except in graphic novels. Okay, of course, you know, illustrations and pictures are very much more in common in children's books rather than in adults' books. Artwork, important here, see, generally artwork plays a great role. So what's the importance of illustrations or the artwork, you know, in children's literature, in children's books or children's stories? The artwork, illustration or using illustrations plays a greater role in books intended for younger reader, especially pre-literate children, especially for children yani, before the age of, you know, going to school. Children's picture books often serve as an accessible source of high-quality art for young children. Even after children learn to read well enough to enjoy a story without illustrations, they continue to appreciate the occasional drawings found in chapter books. Okay, showing here the importance of illustrations and pictures in children's books, and, you know, how, you know, these illustrations, you know, are kept in the minds of children. Okay, in the minds of children, you know, after even finishing, you know, finishing, you know, reading these books. According to Joyce Wally in the International Companion Encyclopedia of Children's Literature, okay, an illustrated book, this is also important here, an illustrated book differs from a book with illustration, in that a good illustrated book is one where the pictures enhance or add depth to the text. Okay, you have books with illustrations, and these illustrations just, you know, to help, you know, to show or to explain, you know, certain parts of a book. But when children's books, we have illustrated books, fully illustrated books, and these illustrations, you know, help to give, you know, deeper meaning to what is being, you know, told, or what is, you know, read by the children. So illustrated books, you know, pictures here are meant, you know, to help to give a better idea about, you know, what is read, and to give deeper meaning. Early children's books such as Orbis, this is important, one of the early children's books اللي هو ايش عندنا الأوربس Pictios were illustrated by woodcut. Okay, one of the earliest, okay, or early, let's say, Orbis Pictios, illustrated by a famous, you know, illustrator اللي هو woodcut. And many times the same image was, يعني, sometimes, you know, images used in a certain book, are, you know, used again in other books, regardless to their relevance, okay, to another book. They are just used because they are beautiful, and they are, you know, يعني they make, you know, they make children happy and, you know, more interested in reading the stories or the books. So they were spread a number of books regardless of how appropriate the illustration was for the story. New processes, طبعا, you know, in the new century, a new process started to help in illustrating, okay, children's books. So that, you know, I mean, new processes such as, you know, copper and steel engraving, okay, were first used in 1830s as a way of, you know, illustrating, okay, pictures, books, or pictures, children's stories. One of the first uses of chromolithography, okay, another way, you know, of using, you know, of illustrating a pictures book. One of the first uses of chromolithography, which is what is, you know, chromolithography? It's a way of making multicolored prints. A way of making multi-colored prints. That is chromolithography in children's books. And that was demonstrated in a book that's called, you know, Peter, published in Germany in 1845. Another English illustrator, or another illustrator, English illustrator, his name, you know, is Walter Crane, refined its use in children's books in the late 1800s. The use of, you know, this, you know, way, okay, chromolithography. Another method of creating illustration for children books, this is also important. You know, this is now a third way of, you know, illustrating children's books. الetching, okay, الetching, okay, used by George Cruikshank in the 1850s, okay. اللي هو الetching, sort of graving, or, you know, carving. By the 1860s, top artists in the West were illustrating for children, okay, يعني some famous names by the 1860s, you know, appeared, like, you know, Crane, Randolph, you know, Caldecott, Kate Greenaway, then John Tenniel. Okay, these are famous illustrators for children's books. Most pictures were still black and white at that time. Okay, يعني most, not all, most of the pictures or the illustrations were black and white in يعني around, you know, 1860s. A bit earlier and after. They were still black and white, and many color pictures were hand-colored. Okay, the essential guide to children's books and their creators credits Caldecott with the concept of extending the meaning of text beyond literal visualization. In India, we have a famous, you know, name in India, Nandalal Bose, whose paintings, okay, are considered artistic treasures, as a famous illustrator for children's books. Okay, Nandalal Bose, okay, whose paintings are considered artistic treasures. Okay, very artistic, you know, illustrations. Illustrated books for children from the late 1800s to the 1900s. Okay, over 100 years. In the West, That's in India. In the West, 20th century artists such as, who? K. Nelson, Edmund Dulac, and Arthur Rackham produced illustrations that are still reprinted today. Developments in printing capabilities were reflected in children's books. After World War II, offset lithography became more refined, and painter-style illustrations such as Brain Goldsmiths were common by the 1950s. That is sort of, you know, a background, a general background and introduction to children's literature, what it really means, and, you know, different definitions of children's literature, and, you know, some famous, the classification and the categories of children's literature, and the types of each category, and then the importance of a general idea about, you know, illustration and using artwork in children's literature, how it started first, and its importance in children's literature, children's books, along with, you know, famous, painters, illustrators, you know, artists who are really well known, in this type of art, or in illustrating children's books. So that's all for today and for this lecture, and soon in the second lecture we start with a historical background of children's literature, and that will be in 2 lectures. Again, just to remind you, please, to read and to watch, you know, the introductory lecture, and along with the introductory lecture, there is, you know, a word file, contents of, you know, the coming lectures, from lecture 8 to the end of the course. So you'll have the stories, the text of the stories that you need to read. So you may start, please, reading these stories, including Pinocchio, the novel, from now. Okay, so you don't need to wait till we come to lecture number 8. Thank you very much, and that's all from me today. See you again later. Salam.